Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like-minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but 2 of my last 3 trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company, again, is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler, and thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. Amateur Traveler Podcast, Episode 65. Today, the Amateur Traveler Podcast goes to Seattle.
I got my bags packed on a roll. I'm heading out there, and I'm ready to go. Looking real good in my passport photo. 15-hour flight, I don't think I'll ever be coming home. You know I love it. I got to see what...
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. This episode is brought to you by the letter A and the imaginary number the square root of -1. Don't let all your numbers be constrained by reality. I have 2 news stories for you today. The first one, I feel like, where have I been? Until it showed up on the front page because troops were sent in to Oaxaca in Mexico, I missed the whole protest thing that was going on there, and in fact had asked within the last a couple weeks a friend of mine who had gone to a language school there what school she had gone to and was starting to make plans to go down there. So in case you were thinking about going to Oaxaca, Oaxaca, Mexico, please make sure you understand that this is a place that has been put on the don't travel list by the United States. The second story is a much lighter one. Ever since Herodotus came up with the first list of the 7 wonders of what we now call the ancient world in the 5th century BC, and thus started the first travel guide, everybody's been coming up with new lists periodically, and USA Today and Good Morning America are announcing on November 9th through 17th their 7 new wonders of the ancient world, and there's a contest for you to vote for the 8th wonder, and I'll put links to that in the show notes, but I'll be interested to see what they have. For those of you who are keeping score at home, the original 7 wonders of the ancient world, only the pyramids at Giza in Egypt remain. The other 6 were the Lighthouse of Alexandria, the Colossus of Rhodes, the Statue of Zeus in Olympia, the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus, the Mausoleum at Halicarnassus, and the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. I had a chance last week to go to Seattle on business. I actually had business with Expedia. I've been there numerous times and thought that since I enjoy Seattle, I would take an extra day. So I took off last Friday and spent the night with a friend who works for the Seattle Sonics. And it got a chance to just enjoy Seattle and a chance to bum around in a city that I've learned to love over the years. Before we start talking about Seattle, let's dismiss one myth first of all. If you've heard about Seattle, you've probably heard that it rains a lot. In fact, the joke goes that you don't actually tan in Seattle, you rust. But the reality is that Seattle gets about 37 inches of rain a year, or 942 millimeters for those of you who are European listeners, or anywhere outside the U.S., I suppose, versus, say, New York City, which gets 46.2 inches, or 1,173 millimeters. So it actually gets less rain, for instance, than New York City. But, and here's the but, it has 201 cloudy days per year compared to New York, for instance, which has 152, or compared to where I live in San Jose, which has 300 sunny days a year. So when you go to Seattle, it's uncommon to have a day that's actually really raining, especially raining very hard. Misting is not all that uncommon, but it's common to have a day that is kind of gray. And if you look at the pictures that I'll put up on the website, you'll see that my pictures, much of them are under clouds, and you'll see gray skies and such, and that's fairly common in Seattle. So first of all, best time to go to Seattle is the summertime. In the summertime, you get the longer days because it is significantly further north than much of the U.S., and you'll get much more chance of sunlight, and I would recommend that as the best time to go to Seattle. This is a good time to talk about the geography of Seattle. Seattle is surrounded by water. On the west side of Seattle is the Puget Sound, which is a large body of salt water coming in from the Pacific Ocean. On the east side of Seattle is Lake Washington, and beyond Lake Washington, which is a freshwater lake, are the towns of Bellevue and Redmond, where Microsoft is located. Been there a number of times on business. Only once have I had a meeting with Bill Gates, though. And then surrounded the area of Seattle, there are numerous islands. There's Mercer Island in Lake Washington. There's Whidbey Island, which is a lovely place to visit a little further up Puget Sound. And then to the east and west are two mountain ranges. And so we said that Seattle has a lot of cloudy days. When it's not cloudy and the sun is out, to the west you would see the Olympic mountain range, and Seattle is in the rain shadow of the Olympics. There are places that are the west of the Olympics that get 200 inches of rain a year. And then to the east of Seattle is the Cascade Mountain Range. We had friends when I was growing up who lived in Mukilteo up by Everett, Washington, north of Seattle. And on a clear day, out the one side of their house, you would see the snow-capped Olympics, and out the other side, you would see the Cascades. So if you do get one of those unfortunately rare clear days, beautiful blue sunny days in that area, it is one of the most beautiful places in the world. Unfortunately, they're a little few and far between, so you can't plan on when you go to Seattle, but that's, I think, one of the reasons why people like the area. It is a very green area because of all the moisture and the clouds. It is called the Emerald City. For you history buffs, Seattle gets its name from Chief Seattle, or Chief Sealth, depending on how you pronounce it, who is a leader of the Suquamish and Duwamish tribes in the area. For getting around Seattle, a car isn't really needed to get around the downtown area. The downtown area is relatively long and narrow in the north and south direction, with free shuttle buses running the predominant area of the downtown every block or so. And so it's very easy to get around downtown, at least in the north and south direction. Unfortunately, the east and west direction is a hill. The west side of Seattle at the Puget Sound is low, and the east side of Seattle at Lake Washington is high. It's also relatively easy to catch a bus from Seattle to downtown. Route 174 or 194 will take you to or from SeaTac, the Seattle-Tacoma Airport, to downtown Seattle for $2.
In the year late 2009, in time for the 2010 Vancouver Winter Olympics, there will also be a light rail system that will go from downtown to the airport and avoid some of Seattle's notorious rush hour traffic, which the bus does not avoid. Where a car does come in more handy is for some of the outlying neighborhoods. There's still bus routes available, and there are also tour buses available to get to some of those areas. But for instance, up in the northern part of Seattle is a number of little tiny picturesque little parts of town with their own downtowns, such as Fremont. Fremont probably is best known for the troll that lives under the Fremont Bridge. The troll is a statue that is, I believe, concrete that's about 20 feet wide under this great big bridge that goes from Seattle to Fremont. The body of water that it goes over connects Puget Sound to Lake Washington. I don't see one name on the map for all of this, but basically there's Salmon Bay, Lake Union, which is just north of Seattle, Portage Bay, and then there's a shipping canal that connects Portage Bay and Union Bay finally to Lake Washington, and a series of locks. And those locks are just south of the University of Washington, which is to the north then and east of Seattle. Getting back to Fremont for a second, I'll post a link in the show notes to a walking tour of the Fremont district. According to the walking tour, Fremont marches to the beat of a different drummer. The motto of the neighborhood is De Libertas Quirkas, which roughly translated means free to be peculiar. No, I'm making this stuff up. It features a Sunday market, a European-style flea market. In addition to the troll, there's also a statue of Lenin, a statue of Rapunzel. There's a number of shops, restaurants, and even a few pubs in the area as well. Also, if you're in Fremont, don't miss the Fremont Rocket. I'll read you a description from a site I found called the Seattle Odyssey, which is a wonderful site for some of the sort of roadside kitsch kind of things you can find in Seattle. Fremont Rocket, non-nuclear, was constructed as using a 1950s rocket and is graced a defunct surplus. The Fremont Rocket was constructed using a 1950s rocket which had graced a defunct surplus shop in Belltown. Local artists added metalwork, neon paint, and a mural of blast-off clouds and whirling galaxies. The rocket was erected with much fanfare in 1994. Its nozzles ooze clouds of vapor at regular intervals through the day. If you get up to Fremont, you should also try and get to Gasworks Park. Gasworks Park is a park at the northern end of Lake Union. Again, Lake Union is north of Seattle. And as you look south from Gasworks Park, you get a lovely view of the cityscape. So day or night, the pictures that you will see in the photo gallery are from a nighttime visit to Gasworks Park. Lovely view of the city and the cityscape. As you look back at the city from Gasworks Park, you film buffs might want to note the houseboats on your right along the side of Lake Union, and those would include one of the houseboats that was featured in Sleepless in Seattle. As you come down south from Fremont, you come to the lovely hill, which is the neighborhood of Queen Anne, and then as you get further south, you come to Seattle Center. And Seattle Center is, among other things, where you would find the Space Needle. And the Space Needle is a fairly iconic representation of Seattle. You can go up, obviously, in the Space Needle. Adults are $14. Children 7 under 3 are free. And the Space Needle is open till 11 p.m., except for weekends when it's open till midnight, so you can see a lovely view of the city. The Space Needle is left over from the 1962 World's Fair, and it is part of the larger Seattle Center. Seattle Center, which has an amusement park. It has the Pacific Science Museum, which I remember enjoying quite a lot as a child. Haven't been there in a few years. As well as the arena for the Seattle Sonics and some theaters there as well. Also located at the Seattle Center is the Experience Music Project. And the building for the Experience Music Project is not to be missed. It's one of those very unbox-shaped buildings. Reminds me of the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao. I have not yet been to the Experience Music Project inside, and in part the reason for that is that my kids have been, and I've had friends who've gone also, and the actual Experience Music Project has had mixed reviews from the people I've known who've seen it. Some have really enjoyed it, and others found it not particularly inspiring. But the building itself, definitely wonderful, and right there at the base of the Space Needle. Also next to the Space Needle, and left over from the World's Fair from 1962, is the monorail. And the monorail takes a very short path into downtown Seattle, or at least it did. It is currently broken. Unfortunately, there was an accident where two of the trains hit along a curve, and the company that built it has long since gone out of business. So if you have any experience in fixing monorails from 1962 World Fairs, Seattle could use your help. From the Space Needle, I actually walked down the hill to the waterfront and then along the piers, where my next stop would have been the Seattle Aquarium, which is on the waterfront. One actually thing that I have against the way they've laid out Seattle is, I said that Seattle goes downhill to the Puget Sound. The last thing that you get before the line of piers, which have the ferries and the aquarium and some shops and restaurants and such, is a 2-story highway as well as a train track. So that kind of gets in the way of your sightseeing as you're up the hill. And so Seattle, although it's right in the water, doesn't always seem to pay any attention to the fact that it's right in the water. Not sure quite why. Probably some good historical reasons for that. Your other alternative at this point could be to head towards downtown and the shopping area, if shopping is more what you have in mind. And if you're on foot, you're about 5 blocks from the Space Needle to Battery Street, and at Battery Street is where the free shuttle buses along 5th, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, and 1st Street run. And they run from Battery Street in the north all the way down in the south to Jackson Street, and that should be most of the downtown area that you'd be interested in seeing. I know this is the second time I mentioned the free shuttle buses, but one of the reasons I bring it up is, as I described to you all the different places that I walked in the city, I should probably also mention that when I was done, I had some quite large blisters also, so you might want to take advantage of that service. So if you were going to go along the waterfront, one of the other stops that you could make, besides some of the seafood restaurants along there, is the ferry building. You could also watch the ferries come in that are heading off to various parts in the Puget Sound. The next stop I made was to go back up the hill and backtrack a little to the Pike Place Market. And the Pike Place Market is located at Western Avenue and Pike. And I'll play for you a little bit of a sound scene tour I did for in the Pike Place Market.
I'm standing in the middle of the Pike Place Market. One thing the sound scene tour won't cover is what kind of sounds I'm hearing right now, what kind of smells I'm smelling right now. The Flying Fish Place is right here, which many people have probably heard about, which has people throwing fish back and forth. It's basically a fish market that's turned into a tourist attraction. And there are people offering me dried fruit, there's bakeries, lots of different restaurants here, and lots of tourists. And where there are tourists, there are street musicians. There are florists. Place Bakery looks pretty inviting here in terms of something good to munch on. Delicacies. And then as you go farther along the market, it starts to get to be more and more crafts. Here's a place with some lovely Seattle pictures. And then a number of places with vegetables, fresh vegetables and fresh fruit. Woolley's famous sausages. So it really is an actual market, and you can get fresh seafood here. Here's some jumbo shrimp and Alaskan king crab sections. Fresh vegetables.
Where you going?
down in the evening, right around 6 o'clock. People start shutting things down. So it's not a place with a lot of nightlife.
That gives you a little taste of what the Pike Place Market is like. It is a place I really enjoy, despite the fact that it is very touristy. And you'll find an interesting collection of people there. I mentioned the street musicians, or you heard the street musicians in that particular clip. There's the balloon guy who's wearing a big hat made of balloons and blowing up balloons for the kids. There's a cheese-making shop where you can watch the cheese being made in large vats while you're there. There was somebody who was doing Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from memory, was reciting the book dressed in Victorian garb. There was an interesting fellow who was panhandling there, and his sign, if I can find a picture of it, said, "My father was killed by ninjas, need money for karate lessons," which is definitely a new approach, let's just say. And the other thing I like about the Pike Place Market is it is a good place to grab a bite to eat. There are a number of little shops there. There are bakeries. I saw Russian food. I saw Vietnamese food. A lot of little cafes sequestered around in little nooks and crannies there, especially if you get just one block away to the east from the main market. There's a lot of both little interesting stores to shop at, as well as a lot of little interesting places to eat, a lot of different ethnic food there. So you might want to try and plan being at Pike Place sometime around noon. I didn't quite manage to do that. I got there a little early and wasn't quite hungry for food, so I ate another place, and there's another cluster of cafes that we'll talk about later on in the show. I have a friend who lived in Seattle for a while who also recommended a French restaurant at the Pike Place Market, Maximilian's. And for Maximilian's, he said you walk towards the main market and you turn left at the pig. And I haven't mentioned the pig yet. There's a large brass pig that you'll probably see kids riding on there, as well as footprints that go along the cement where this brass pig apparently was walking. So turn left at the pig and head into the back reaches of the market, and you'll find Maximilian's French Restaurant, which comes highly recommended from Mark, a coworker of mine. Oh, you know Mark. Mark was on the show talking about Antarctica a while back. He's the one who spent 2 summers in Antarctica. So let's stop and orient ourselves. As you're standing at the Pike Place Market, to the north of you, between you and the Space Needle, that area of downtown is called Belltown. And the area to the south of you, right here, is called West Edge. And then further south, about 10 blocks south from there, is the area we're going to next, or in a bit, rather, which is Pioneer Square. But first, we're going to take a little break here, and we're going to go up the hill. And if you go up the hill, you go into the main shopping area of Seattle. And as I talk about Seattle and the shopping area, one place that's worth mentioning is Nordstrom's. Nordstrom's is up the hill here. And Nordstrom's got its start in Seattle, along with other companies like Starbucks, which you'll find everywhere. And I don't know if you've heard the story about Mr. Nordstrom, John Nordstrom, who came to the U.S. in 1887 at 16 with only $5 in his pockets. He's one of those U.S. success stories. And he basically heard about the Alaskan gold rush and went up to the Klondike, worked for a couple of years there. Very, very hard work, but within 2 years he made $13,000 in a gold mine there, according to the company history site, Nordstrom's. And then he came back to Seattle, and he had met a fellow who was in the shoe repair business, and they opened a shoe store. And that's how Nordstrom's got started in downtown Seattle in 1901. Now, this is one of those, I told you those stories so I could tell you this one kind of thing, where I've saved my favorite part of Seattle for last, and that's the Pioneer Square area. And Pioneer Square is the oldest part of Seattle. A couple things you should know about Seattle. We said that Seattle is built on a hill and it slopes towards the water. As you get down to Pioneer Square, one of the streets down there is Yesler Way. And you've actually already heard of Yesler Way, even though you may not realize it, because the original name of Yesler Way was Skid Row. And that was the road that they would slide the logs down the hill into the bay, where they could then ship them off to the places where they would, to the sawmills, rather. And so this part of Seattle has a little bit of a seedy history, and there's still some rescue missions down there, as well as near Occidental Parks. There are also art galleries, so it's an interesting area. This is the other place where I said there are a lot of different cafes. I ate in a lovely little Turkish cafe and had a great gyro for lunch here, and there are a lot of different types of cafes around this area. The other thing you should know about this area, which is particularly interesting for me as from history buff, is they had incredible problems with drainage in this area. I know. Don't you love somebody who starts a story with, there's something very interesting, let's talk about drainage? No. Listen to me. So what they did eventually is they figured out that they were going to have problems with the streets because the streets were too low in this area. And so what they did is they built up the streets so that the street was basically another 10 feet higher. But they didn't change the sidewalks. And so there was a time down here in the Pioneer Square area, if you wanted to cross the street, you climbed a ladder to the street level, crossed the street, and then climbed a ladder down. And as you may imagine, that wasn't something that was going to last that long. That wasn't going to be very workable. Although they actually put up with it for a decade, and about 17 different inebriated gentlemen managed to die falling off the ladders trying to cross the streets. And the ladies in their long dresses didn't like it too much either. And so eventually what they did is they just built new sidewalks on top of the old sidewalks one floor up. What was the first floor of the buildings became the second floor. And there's a tour down here at Pioneer Square called the Seattle Underground Tour. And I wouldn't necessarily say that I thought about doing a sightseeing tour, but I try and keep this show family friendly, and they get a little bawdy humor in there. But I really enjoyed the Seattle Underground Tour as they talk about and take you down through these abandoned first floors of these buildings. There's a theater down there. You're in old bars, old hotels, and they take you around and give you a historic view of this city from this first floor of these buildings that basically have been frozen in time because they've stopped using them. They're covered with dust everywhere. If you have dust allergies, don't do the Seattle Underground Tour. But if you're a fan of history, I think you'd enjoy the Seattle Underground Tour here in Pioneer Square in the southern part of downtown Seattle. There are also, for those of you who might be a little claustrophobic or afraid of the dark, tours that go around the upper part of Pioneer Square. There are also self-guided tours, and I'll put a link in there for a self-guided tour of this area, including where Skid Row was. And there's a building there called the Smith Building that was, for a while, I think when it was built in 1916 is the date that occurs to me, the tallest building west of the Mississippi. And there is an observation area in there, and I found that in the fall, at least, that observation area is only open on the weekends. So I'll include a picture of the foyer in the enhanced version of this, the iTunes enhanced version of this that has pictures, but I wasn't able to go up to the top and look. But basically, the two nice places to look at downtown Seattle would be the Space Needle in the north and the Smith Tower in the south, but you'd have to get there someday that it is open, which it wasn't when I was there. The other interesting thing in the Pioneer Square area, we talked about Nordstrom and the fact that he made his money in the Yukon, up in the gold rush in the Yukon. And a lot of the traffic that went to the Yukon went through Seattle. And so there is an interesting museum in Seattle called the Klondike Gold Rush Museum, which my family and I really enjoyed, which is also there down in Pioneer Square. And it is at Jackson and 2nd Street, if you're looking for it. And it is part of a museum. So this is a part of the museum. It's the Klondike Gold Rush National Park. It's the Seattle unit, a National Historic Park. There is the other part of this National Historic Park is in Skagway. And then there's also a Canadian portion of this park in the Yukon. This is a part of an international historic park talking about the Yukon Gold Rush. But it's very interesting to see some of the history of what people went through, how you had to haul your gear for a year, basically, because they didn't want people to come into the Yukon and be unprepared, and so you had to have a year's worth of provisions, which is quite a lot of provisions, and there would be people who would help you haul them up these long passes, and they have pictures because it's at a time when the photography had been developed, and so you could see a lot of that at the Klondike Gold Rush Seattle unit of the Klondike Gold Rush National Historic Park there in Pioneer Square. I'll put links in the show notes at amateurtraveler.com to the walking tour of the Pioneer Square area. A couple things that I haven't mentioned yet that are on the walking tour. Occidental Park. Interesting name for that park, Occidental Park, because Occidental means Western. And near this spot in 1886, as a plaque in Occidental Park will say, because of tough times, people turned against the immigrant Chinese workers who were in this area. And at First and Main, Seattle's Home Guard had to form a protective square around the Chinese residents and fight back a vigilante mob to protect them. And basically, most of the city's 350 Chinese residents were forced to leave the city at that point in 1886, but soon returned because it became obvious that their hard work and the fact that they were willing to work for low wages was essential for Seattle's economy. So kind of ironic that is Occidental Square, given the history of the area. Also in there you'll see a number of different art projects, a number of different statues and such in Occidental Park. I'll put a picture in of a couple of them, especially the Firefighters Memorial, which is there in Occidental Park and has a statue of 3 bronze firefighters who are fighting a particular fire there, apparently. This area has burned down. When the streets were raised, basically that was right after a catastrophic fire in the 1800s. It was in 1889 that an overturned pot of glue managed to start a fire that eventually burned down 33 blocks in this area. And that's what led to the rebuilding of the streets higher than the sidewalks, basically, when they were reconstructing for this. And I'll put a link into an article that is a review of the Seattle Underground Tour, which gives some of the historic facts. Talks about the number of seamstresses, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, who lived in that area at the time. As we wrap up Seattle, I should also mention there are 3 other tours I want to tell you about. One is there are bus tours available that will take you around the outer part of Seattle, like Fremont, which I mentioned at the beginning. That'll take you to the ship locks and such, so I'll put links in the show notes for those. There's also a day-long walking tour which will take you all over Seattle, which I seriously thought about doing this day, but wanted a little more freedom than that, but I've heard very good things about that walking tour of Seattle. I'll put links in the show notes for that walking tour. And then the third one is Seattle is also a place that has the duck tours. And you know that I'm a big fan of these tours that go around in amphibious vehicles, spend part of the time touring on land and part of the time touring from the water. It just wasn't a nice enough day, at least in the morning when I got there, to do the duck tour in this particular occasion. But that's Seattle, a city which I very much enjoy, and if it gets cold and dreary, one thing you can always count on in Seattle is being able to find a good cup of coffee. In the resources section of the show, this is not usually a time where I talk about podcasting, but usually talk about travel. One thing I did want to mention, there is a free podcast conference if any of you is interested in starting your own podcast called PodCamp. There's one coming up here in San Francisco in the second week of November. I did just get this lovely blues song by John Havens from About.com Guide to Podcasting. I'll play you just a little clip of this.
Surfing on the net, and I'm wondering where to go. Got nothing but confusion concerning Web 2.0. Can't make my message real, can't make my content sticky. When a friend emails a link to a thing called the PodCamp Wiki, yeah. It says that PodCamp is an unconference type event, where when I go, I don't just attend, I'm a participant. Just register my name and a session if I want to speak. Looks like my webbish world ain't quite so bleak, singing the PodCamp blues. That's right. New media.
The full song that John sent takes almost 6 minutes, so I won't play the whole thing here, but I'll put a link to it in the show notes, as well as to PodCamp, which again is a free conference to both participate at as well as present at. You can just sign up and say you want to do a session. Another resource for you, if you're looking for local travelers people who love travel like you, one place you might look is meetup.com. Go to travel.meetup.com to look for a local group that is oriented about travel. If you are a U.S. citizen, I also encourage you to vote next Tuesday, November 7th. I'll put a link to a resource I got from Ed from the Searching the Internet podcast on how to find useful voting and election information. I always love to get feedback on this show or any show. Feel free to email me at host@amateurtraveler.com or call the voice comment line, which is 206-MOM-LOVE, or post on the discussion boards at amateurtraveler.com/board. Carrier pigeon, Telegram, doesn't matter. Love to get the feedback. Love to hear from you. And to close out the show, I have a promo for a show, which is A Year in Europe, which I'm enjoying, another podcast. I'm hoping to have the host of that on the show sometime. So I'll play the promo for that. I'll also play the full version of the new version of the theme song for the show. One other announcement. I have occasionally talked about my faith on the show. I am a Christian. I have started another podcast where I will talk about that, and it's called the Bible Study Podcast, and that's what it will be. It will simply be a Bible study. Won't be preachy, so might want to check that out. And with that, I'd like to say thanks for listening.
Hello, this is Scott.
And this is Cheryl. Tag along as we podcast our way through Europe at ayearineurope.com.
That's www.ayearineurope.com.
Hey, what time did our train leave?
Oh,
boy.
I got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there, and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. 15-hour flight, I don't think I'll ever be coming home. You know I love it. I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
The best and the brightest, served up daily by the sharpest minds in content delivery, Podshow and Limelight.